Okay, this is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm very thrilled and happy to have with me as my guest, Joseph Perkins, who's a partner at Orrick. Joseph, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you today.
So I understand we've kind of known about each other for many, many years, but we've never, I guess, talked or met.
Absolutely. Your name has been shared with me a couple times from some of your prior colleagues, and who always spoke very highly of you.
Well, that's always good to hear. So, Joseph, I want to talk to you today about all things blockchain, cryptocurrency, NFTs, words that get bandied around a lot by the press and by lawyers. And what I want to kind of start by asking you is, what are the legal issues you deal with? What kind of advice do you give? What does a blockchain lawyer do exactly?
It's a great question. It's hard to describe because blockchain and cryptocurrency issues run across a very wide breadth of legal issues. In the same way that, if I could make a comparison, a life sciences attorney might have a number of issues to deal with. So you have things on the corporate side, formation, capital fundraising, issuing tokens or issuing warrants for tokens. And then you have things on the regulatory side. You have things like securities law, you have anti-money laundering, Bank Secrecy Act, and then you have tax and all the other things, and then corporate structuring, right? So you have this really wide variety of things that you're dealing with. And I would say there's not a single lawyer who does everything front to end, right? It really is a team sport. And so when you're talking about a blockchain lawyer, you're talking about one member of that team, like a football player.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about you? Tell me about the site. Which seat do you take in that chain of players?
So I came into blockchain from my background in venture capital. So full background, my roots are in venture capital practice in Silicon Valley, representing tech companies from incorporation through their fundraising process, through M&A and IPO. And probably about 5 years ago, one of my clients was getting into this space, and they said, "Hey, we're doing a blockchain company." And I'd heard about blockchain. I knew a little bit about the technology, but hadn't really done much. And they just kind of launched into it. And so I was learning and growing at the same time this company was. And wrestling with the issues of what is a token and how does it fit within the regulatory regime. And that has expanded now so that what I do on a day-to-day basis is the same type of corporate governance type of things that you would do in a typical venture capital practice, helping people with their equity raise and things like that. But now you're seeing, in addition to the equity raise, you're seeing investors ask for token warrants or token side letters where they're looking forward to where the company may issue a token in the future. You're helping people negotiate those things. You're also helping people navigate the regulatory framework. So I'm, full disclosure, not an anti-money laundering or a Bank Secrecy Act specialist, but I know enough to say, hey, we need to get a specialist involved. Let's have someone come in and I quarterback that relationship where the specialist comes in and helps guide them through. Same thing with tax or securities laws, and kind of overall corporate structuring and thinking of a token launch, if you will. What do you need to do in order to, in a compliant matter, launch a token into the ecosystem?
Well, give me a little bit more detail about that. I mean, is that when you talk about tokens versus equity, I mean, is that anything more than just changing the definition of equity to token? I mean, tell me why it's more complex than just that.
It's very similar, right? They're not quite the same in the sense that tokens may or may not have an equity component and may or may not have a governance component to them, right? So there's a lot of variation in what they actually do, and it's on a project by project basis. So a typical DAO, or decentralized autonomous organization, will oftentimes have a token associated with it that give the token holders a right to dictate what happens to that organization without necessarily having an economic right in the organization. Right? Which is a little bit different than the equity, because equity, like shares of common stock or preferred stock, by definition have both an economic and almost universally a governance right built into it that's dictated by statute, right? So you look at the Delaware Code, and the Delaware Code says you have to do X, Y, and Z with respect to your stockholders. This is how you have to treat them. a token is governed by a smart contract, by technology, if you will, and there's not a lot of regulatory guidance as to how you have to treat a token holder. And so in that sense, there's a lot more variability in what you're trying to solve for.
Oh, right. And of course, you have to put everything contractually since there's no real law of governance around it. Okay. So you're saying ownership and tokens are totally separate. You could own both tokens and equity or just one or the other, right? So
that's exactly right.
Okay. Got it. So then how do you deal with, like, let's just take an issue like valuation or a dilution, for example, like with equity, right? I mean, it's, you obviously have 100% of the shares, you can dilute people, but it still has to be part of the same pie. With tokens, you can just create new tokens, right? Or tell me, how does that work?
Yeah, so if you look at a smart contract or a protocol that is associated with the token, most protocols launch with a predefined number of tokens, right? So maybe you're launching a protocol or a product that has 1 billion tokens associated with it. And some of those protocols are open-ended, so you can increase that number infinitely depending on certain operations within the protocol. And some are locked in place. You can never mint or create an additional token. You have a fixed supply. And so in that sense, it's also very different than equity, because equity, by its nature, is always infinite. You could always go to Delaware and create more shares of preferred stock or more shares of common stock. Where with the token, depending on the code, you may be locked into a fixed number indefinitely, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say code, you mean software code or some other?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, okay, got it. Tokens only apply to cryptocurrency companies, right? I'm assuming a company that's non-cryptocurrency is not issue tokens, or is that not true?
I think you need to separate yourself between a cryptocurrency company, like a company that's issuing a layer 1 protocol like Ethereum or Bitcoin, right, and other companies that operate within the ecosystem. And so, for instance, a lot of gaming companies have recently been getting more and more into cryptocurrency and blockchain-related issues, so that they can issue, in-game items or in-game currency and link it to blockchain, so that people can take those items of that currency outside of the game ecosystem and monetize it, and then bring it back in.
I see.
So you would not think of the gaming company as a blockchain first company. Their primary goal is the game and the entertainment, and the blockchain cryptocurrency aspect is there to enhance the experience or to help people better monetize that experience, versus other players in the ecosystem, which are a blockchain first solution.
Right. But now, let's just take the example of that video game company. Are they still issuing tokens, or they're not?
They are. So one of the things that many people don't quite understand is that there's a hierarchy of coins and tokens, right? So you have a layer 1 protocol like Ethereum that runs smart contracts on top of it. And so a gaming company may say, hey, we want to run an in-game currency, a currency that is unique to our gaming ecosystem. And they'll find one layer 1 protocol that they want to build on top of, right? Mm-hmm. So their coin or their token will be an Ethereum-based token. It will not be Ethereum itself, but it'll be based on the Ethereum blockchain and operate on top of it.
I see. So, like in the case of that game company, would an investor, for example, want tokens in that company as well, or they wouldn't care about that in the video?
They absolutely would want tokens in that company, okay. And that's a lot of the negotiations as we talk about what makes economic sense both for the investment as well as the project that's being created.
I see. And why is that token? I mean, obviously they get value in the equity that they own in the video game company. So, I mean, if the tokens become more valuable, the company, they get, so where does the token part of it come in? In other words, what are they not capturing if they don't get tokens, from the investor standpoint?
It's a really interesting question, because a lot of investors conceptualize ownership of the token as the ultimate goal, right? And the equity as a stepping stone to get to the token. And the reason for that is because many of the blockchain native companies, meaning those that are kind of blockchain first, think of themselves as monetizing wholly through their token. They don't expect to receive any kind of revenues or outside income all of the value is being driven through the token. And then at some point in time, their protocol or their software would be open sourced and kind of launched into the wild. It's governed by one of these tokens. And then the company steps away, is no longer in charge of the protocol, no longer in charge of the system. And so everything that's left is valued through the token itself. And because of that, you have a really shortened cycle between funding and potential liquidity. In a regular tech company, you're looking at anywhere between 5 and 7 years from the time that you start raising capital to the time that you have an M&A or an IPO, where you're taking your product and you're saying, this is the product we're building, which is the token, sitting on top of the code or the platform. And you're saying, we're going to distribute this product out to our stockholders and back away. Well, then the stockholders have direct access to whatever that, economic engine was, and they can monetize it, usually within certain parameters, right? So you don't want to launch a token and then have all of the tokens rush onto the ecosystem at once, and that would lower the price. So you have certain lockup periods where you want people to take a long view of the ecosystem that you've developed so that the value will be stable and have long-term value.
Just like you would handle the equity piece, but now just talking about the tokens, right? You wouldn't have
very much so.
Right? Okay. So is it, maybe this isn't a perfect metaphor or analogy, but is it kind of like if an investor invests in a company, in addition to taking equity, then they, for example, they also took an ownership interest in, say, like their patents or something? I mean, is that kind of like the same idea or not really?
It's not quite the same because the patents are the underlying intellectual property, and you would expect that to be open sourced or managed by a decentralized organization that kind of is able to enforce those rights. It's more like if you had a widget company of some kind, they're making some type of product, and you say, we're only ever going to make 1 million widgets, and we promise that you will get 100,000 widgets. Right, so you've got a number of a fixed supply of the company's end product that you can then go and you can sell or you can use for, if it's useful for you to use. There's different reasons to want to acquire them, but that's kind of what it's akin to, knowing that the company that you're investing in isn't meant to or isn't like to persist more than 2 or 3 years before it says we're done with this project and we're moving on and shutting our doors.
So what remains is the widgets are worth money, but the company may not be worth anything, or it's kind of a shell or something, basically.
That's right.
Yeah, interesting. So going back to what you said earlier about how you have code that determines the number of tokens. If you need to increase the number of tokens, why not just change the software code? I mean, it's just software code.
You can. Well, depending on how the code is written, some code is unalterable, it's locked, right? And meaning that there's this concept of a private key in the blockchain world, and the private keys allow you to go into certain parts of the code and make alterations. The keys are generally held as a community, right? Which is where the voting comes in, and people can vote to approve certain changes. And if you hit a certain threshold, the keys are opened up so that they can be used to make the changes. And then they're put back into kind of a lockbox, if you will. Those keys are allowed to change certain parameters within the code, but not necessarily all of the code, right? And that's one of the things about blockchain is that you can make it as restrictive or as open as you would like. You could have the entire code open for alteration, or you can say only certain things may be altered and everything else is locked, and then the chain itself prevents you from going in and making those changes.
Even though you originated the chain to begin with.
Yeah, because the person who originated the chain is no longer in charge, right? At some point, when you open source it or you launch the protocol out into the ecosystem, you're basically taking those private keys that you hold and giving them to the ecosystem, and then you're just a participant at that point with whatever tokens you may have.
Well, why would you want to lock yourself in then? Wouldn't it always be better to make it so that you can add more tokens?
I think there's this balancing act that companies go through between flexibility and predictability, right? So being able to say, we will only authorize and there will only ever be X number of tokens in the ecosystem drive a certain amount of value through the tokens. If you had this back door where someone or a group of people could come in and just create more tokens, it would create instability and kind of a lack of predictability in the value of the underlying tokens themselves.
Well, and I guess that's not good for things like currency.
Exactly. Well, I mean, if you look at the way that the US currency works, the Fed could create more currency at any point in time, but in the United States, we have a certain amount of trust for the government, and that they will use that power in a way that benefits the ecosystem as a whole and not one group of people.
Makes sense. Well, it makes sense to me, because if currency fluctuates too much, it's not going to be very useful, right? Because you want to know that if I pay a certain amount of currency tomorrow, in a year from now or 10 days or 5, it's more or less the same, right? You don't want it to be wildly fluctuating, or I can't really use it. But then, of course, the flip side is that doesn't make it a great investment. I mean, that's what's always struck me as weird about cryptocurrency. What's good for it as a currency doesn't really make it great as an investment. If it makes it great as an investment, it doesn't seem like it's going to be great as a currency.
So the investment aspect of cryptocurrency doesn't necessarily relate to the number. I mean, the fixed number helps on the back end prevent dilution to the value that you've accumulated. What drives the value is user adoption, right? Like most software, right? The more people that are interested in using the ecosystem and using the platform, the more valuable the currency becomes. And so you'll see this in a number of projects where they'll launch a governance token and people are interested in helping to manage or monitor what's going on. And so there's a demand that drives the value of that token higher.
Right. Well, let's touch on blockchain. We kind of sped by the terms blockchain and cryptocurrency a lot. Now, obviously, I know, at least my understanding is blockchain is obviously very important for making cryptocurrency work. It's got the distributed database system for doing the transactions. But is there a role for blockchain really outside of cryptocurrency? Because that's the one thing I'm not sure about, or tell me about that.
Yeah, so you see non-cryptocurrency applications of blockchain in a number of places. So for instance, shipping and logistics is one place where we've seen people try to use blockchain technology. It's a way to track your sources of materials, where that, a particular container, a particular material can be sourced and recorded on chain so that it can't be altered later on, and you can trace back all the way to the origin of where something came from. You see this in some more kind of light circumstances where you might have a ticketing platform that wants to issue tickets to a concert. And so it says, well, I'm going to issue these as NFTs, right? And so you can transfer it, you can move it around if you want. We don't mind if you do that. That's up to you. But when you come to the gate, we're going to verify that you have this NFT, and then you'll be let in. So there's other applications you can think of where title to property, like cars, your car title might at some point in time be transferred to a blockchain ledger, right? Something that can't be altered without your permission, because you have in your possession the NFT in your wallet, and it can only be moved if you allow it to be moved. Right, so there's a number of non-cryptocurrency applications.
What percentage of it? I mean, how much of blockchain is being used outside of cryptocurrency? I mean, is it like 95.5, or what would you, if you had to guess, what would you say it was?
Oh, that's very difficult. If you take NFTs as a non-cryptocurrency, right, then you're much more balanced. If you include NFTs in that group, I would say it's much more kind of 80-20 to cryptocurrency to non-cryptocurrency applications.
In the supply chain thing, are NFTs being used in the supply chain thing, or that's an example of a non-NFT, non-cryptocurrency blockchain application?
The latter, right? You could potentially use NFTs as a way to track specific containers or things like that. But what we've seen is a full-on blockchain application using to track that supply chain.
Okay. So that's an example of a non-NFT, non-cryptocurrency application of blockchain.
Correct.
Okay. So now let's go back to a blockchain lawyer, because you hear that a lot. Now, We talked about cryptocurrency. I get the cryptocurrency tokens, that involves complicated different things, there's different regulations, things like that. if blockchain were the only new thing element, is there something from a legal perspective as a lawyer that's any different than just being another SaaS company or just a regular technology software company? Or is it just that, but when you boil it down?
I think what would happen if there was non-cryptocurrency applications of the blockchain, and that's what kind of you're focused on, most of what I would do on a day-to-day basis wouldn't change that much from a regular kind of VC attorney, right?
Yeah, okay.
Corporate governance, fundraising, and those things. But on the IP side, right, the IP attorneys would still be very, very busy because you're negotiating software licenses that have these features that are a little bit different than most software operates. It's immutability and the nodes that operate to verify the blockchain and how the economics flow into that.
I see. Okay. That's helpful. Okay, so now let's talk about NFTs. You mentioned that. It was kind of a drive-by mention. I want to drill down a little bit on this. So tell me a little about how NFTs kind of fit into this mosaic of tapestry as we're talking about cryptocurrency, blockchain, and NFTs.
It's interesting to see kind of the way that the blockchain cryptocurrency ecosystem has developed over time. And you saw it, kind of early on. You have the layer one protocols like Bitcoin and Ethereum and a couple others that have developed over time. And then you see increasingly interesting applications of those layer one protocols like decentralized finance, right? Or kind of ecosystem infrastructure projects that have popped up for price discovery or things like that. But those things are very abstract, and I think it's really difficult for someone who is not deep in the technology to really jump in and appreciate, really short term. NFTs, on the other hand, I think are a little bit easier to appreciate in the sense that people know what art is, they know what a digital file is. And so the explosion of digital art files as a proof of ownership over the last 12 months has been just astounding. Which is interesting because NFTs, there's a variety of rights that attach to the NFT itself. For instance, you're buying a piece of artwork. Are you allowed to reproduce it? Are you allowed to commercialize it in some way? What can and can't you do? Well, that's all built into the NFT itself. And there's not a universal kind of standard for every NFT. They all have different rights attached to them.
Well, and those rights are governed by, it's just like a EULA, right? It's a license agreement of some kind, right? Basically, right? Because typically you don't own the copyright to these works, right? So,
That's exactly right.
Is it sort of like, my understanding at a very high level, my understanding with NFTs, for example, taking about artwork, although I want to get back a little bit to the non-artwork world for a second. In the artwork world, or it's like buying a copy, or it's buying like a limited print edition, is my understanding. Right. Is that basically the idea?
That's right. And so in the agreement or in the EULA, as you put it, it could be that this will be the only one ever printed. It'll be a one of one. There will never be another NFT with this artwork, but you're not allowed to commercialize it. You can't go and put it on mugs and t-shirts and stuff like that. That's reserved for the artist.
I see. Right?
And you have other ones that are, okay, well, this is a 1 of 20 or a 1 of 30, right? Mm-hmm. You also have NFTs like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, which is kind of an algorithmically generated artwork where there's certain parameters that are built into an algorithm that then generates 10,000 NFTs, none of which are the same, but they're all part of a collection of NFTs that are related because they all spawned from this one algorithm.
So are the rights that are governed by the NFT, is it embedded into the NFT somehow? Like how can it be looked up? I mean, let's say it's not a piece of paper I'm signing, is it?
No, you should be able to look at the metadata in the NFT to govern the rights. That's my understanding. And if there's a technologist listening to this who disagrees with me, I apologize in advance, but that's my understanding.
Okay. And I assume that for most artists, works of art and things like that, it's somewhat standardized at this point. I mean, the rights that you typically get from an NFT or not?
I think there's some standard provisions, in the same way that a lot of copyright laws has become standardized around right to display, right to transfer, but not the right to commercialize or right to reproduce. But you have other things that are embedded in the NFTs, like secondary royalty rights. So you'll have the producer of the NFT that says, okay, I'm selling this for $100, but every time the NFT transfers to another person, I get 5% of whatever that transfer price is, and it gets sent automatically to a wallet that's predefined within the smart contract.
So are NFT license provisions typically negotiated or not?
Usually what happens is the platform that's issuing them is kind of predefining all of the licenses. So if you go to NBA Top Shots and you want to buy, a card with one of your favorite sports athletes, you're not going to go to Dapper Labs and say, I want to negotiate the license associated with this card. They're going to say, well, this is all standardized and you get to buy it.
I see. If
you go on to OpenSea, on the other hand, which is a marketplace for NFTs, each NFT may be slightly different as to what's included. My suspicion is that most people aren't digging in and reading, because what they care about is really the right to display and the right to transfer. If you had an NFT that did have the right to commercialize or some other special rights attached to it, you would probably be calling that out as a separate matter in the description of the NFT.
Okay, so now let's go back to you as the lawyer. You have an NFT company. Tell me, are there specific tricky issues that come up with that in the same way as cryptocurrency or layer one cryptocurrency? Or again, this is something that your IPT lawyers have to deal with mainly?
Certainly, we bring in my colleagues from the IP group because they're very, very good at this. But there are things around NFT platforms. For instance, if you're a marketplace for NFTs, you want to make sure that your NFTs that are being sold and bought on your platform are not securities, right? You don't want your platform to turn into a securities exchange. And so some of the things that we talk through with these companies is, okay, what restrictions are we going to place on who can put NFTs on your platform and what they have to look like, right? Because you could conceptually take a company and turn its stock into NFTs, right? Stock certificate 1, stock certificate 2.
I see, yeah.
Which, if was then trading, would be a bad thing, because the SEC could come in and say your platform is essentially a securities exchange, not registered. So we kind of think through some of those issues. You also think about anti-money laundering issues with any kind of platform. The FinCEN has defined cryptocurrencies as a CVC, a convertible virtual currency. And if you're in the business of taking those and giving them to other people, right, you could be a money transmitter. And so we look at the process of the product and how the sales operate so that you're not categorized as a money transmitter and you're not, in somehow violation of the Bank Secrecy Act.
So are most cryptocurrency companies using NFTs and vice versa? Tell me the tightness of the relationship between those two terms.
So to repeat your question, are you saying, are they using those terms interchangeably?
Well, I'm asking, is a crypto company that's in cryptocurrency, are they usually also dealing with NFTs or not necessarily? Or tell me, I'm not sure, because when I think of art, for example, I think of that as separate from, I could think of a regular company that's not using cryptocurrency selling NFTs, and I could see if a crypto company having no need for NFTs if it's just issuing cryptocurrency, for example.
Yeah, I think they tend to separate. Right, so you've got companies that are either squarely in the cryptocurrency space and they're issuing tokens that are fungible tokens, meaning there's a fixed supply and the one token looks exactly like the next token. There's not unique identifiers on them. And they tend to play in that space specifically. And then you have the other players who are in the NFT space. And they generally are categorized by a creator or someone who's a content creator who wants to mint or generate NFTs. You have companies that help people mint or generate NFTs. You have marketplaces that help the buying and selling of NFTs. And they don't generally issue a standalone token, if you will. They're mainly focused on the NFTs themselves.
Right. But as you talked about earlier, NFTs do take advantage of the blockchain technology, right, to trade them. So there's kind of the backbone, right there. That's kind of the crossover between cryptocurrencies and NFTs. The blockchain technology.
That's right. So each NFT is gonna be based on a particular layer 1 blockchain. And so maybe one NFT is on the Solana blockchain, and you can't send that to a wallet that operates on the Ethereum blockchain, right? They're not interoperable. And so any NFT, you've got to understand what blockchain it's operating on and kind of go from there.
So give me an example of a company that would use both would be using cryptocurrency and NFTs and obviously blockchain.
Oh gosh, now you put me on the spot. You could think of a company that is an NFT marketplace, right? Now they're in the NFT space, and maybe they're not generating their own NFTs, but they're squarely in the ecosystem of NFTs. But maybe they want to issue their own native token as a medium of exchange to promote people to use their marketplaces to go into other marketplaces. So once you're bought into that marketplace and you've got that currency, you're going to use it on that ecosystem or on that platform. And so there's a stickiness, if you will, to issuing a token. I don't think we've seen, at least I've not seen any of the major exchanges issue their own native token. I think that for them, there's enough cash flow just in facilitating the buying and selling of NFTs that issuing your own token just kind of gums up the system a little bit. It makes it more complicated from a regulatory standpoint. So there's no real reason to do it. You do hear of some companies that are fractionalizing NFTs, and they use a native token to help do that. So you would take an NFT and then you want to split it into 10 different parts so you and your friends can each own one piece of this really expensive NFT, right? Because none of you can buy it on your own. So you collectively buy it and it gets put into a smart contract where it's locked up, it can't be moved, but now you can move your interest in that NFT to different places. Platforms that do that will sometimes issue their own kind of native currency for their system, their ecosystem to work.
Is 90% of NFTs and works of art, or what are the other applications for NFTs?
I think the vast majority of them currently are works of art. I think you'll start to see it expand into other rights, whether that be titled to specific things. It's run by a government, so it could have a government-run blockchain that then says, we'll use this to track ownership of vehicles or other property. You see in the gaming space, so let's take your prototypical dungeon crawler game, and you pick up a fiery sword that's super rare, and you want to be able to sell it on a marketplace. Well, some of these gaming companies will allow you to take that in-game item and mint it to an NFT so that you could go out and sell it if that's what you wanted to do.
Oh, interesting. Sort of taking Dungeons and Dragons to the next level.
Yep.
So that's a good example. That video game company is probably also likely dealing with, they're also probably doing with cryptocurrency, right? And they're doing NFTs. I mean, they're certainly accepting Bitcoin or accepting cryptocurrencies, presumably, for their game, right?
Well, Axie Infinity is probably one of the most well-known gaming companies that's out there. They have a game that uses a native token that they use for buying and selling their in-game NFTs, right? So they're trying to kind of put a wall around their own ecosystem and keep people inside once they're in.
And they're also making their own cryptocurrency. They're not using a standard cryptocurrency.
Correct. I mean, it's built on a layer one. It's not its own layer one protocol. It's built on top of that, but it's their own token.
Okay, got it. Okay. Well, Joseph, I peppered you with questions. Did I miss anything major that I failed to ask you? That since I'm not an expert, but maybe there's something. Is there a gaping thing that I might have missed that you want to share?
It's funny because you tell people that you practice in the blockchain space, and there's kind of this assumption that you must know everything that's going on. And I like to say, I don't think there's a single person out there that sees more than 10 or 15% of the marketplace. There's so much news and so much that's just constantly shifting that if you're going to operate in the space, you have to talk to a lot of different people. You have to get a team involved and get everyone's input and everyone's kind of line of sight into what's going on. So I think that's critical when you're looking to build your own team, whether it's your company and you're getting your group of founders together that you can consult with and get input from, or whether it's your attorney or your other service providers that you want to make sure that they have it's not just a one guy saying this is the way it's done. It's a team of people that are constantly thinking about the issues that are coming up.
Got it. Well, Joseph, it's been a wonderful time and a pleasure talking to you. I look forward to the day in 5 years we can chat again. You can tell me what more you've learned.
Looking forward to it, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
This is Richard Hsu and Joseph Perkins. Thanks.